Welcome back to Creating Stuff with Jim. I'm Jim, and it's time to create something. The latest installment of the Inferno build. This is the second episode of the Crawbox build. In the previous episode, you got to see tearing the original transfer case all the way down and start cleaning it up. Now that we got it all torn down, now you get to see what we got to do to put it all back together with all new parts, with a new gear set and some adapter plates. So enough talking about it. It's time to get to work.
All right, now that we got our housing all clean for the first time, we're gonna have to clean it again. Now we're gonna start the process of assembling this. So we have our new 4.7 gear set right here. This is the new main shaft that goes with the Crawbox kit. All these parts came with a protective coating on to keep them from rusting during shipping and storage. So I've already cleaned all that off just using a regular solvent. So, but anyways, our first step is the front bearings. We got to press those onto those two shafts, to the input shaft and the counter shaft. So we got to take this over to the press. But now, press these on. Once I have my bearing press, I have my press blocks, which are these steel blocks here, and then this piece right here is called a clamshell. This, like I said, this is just used to support the bearing while you press the shaft onto it. So just be mindful. Whenever you place this clamshell in the press, you see how I have it placed on how these threaded rods are supported by the press blocks. That's the way it needs to be. If you put it in here like this, when you press it, there's nothing supporting these threaded rods. So when you go to press it on, it's going to flex and you're going to bend it. And then this tool is not going to be very well usable. Do that a couple times, it'll probably be garbage after that. You have to replace the rods. So anyways, don't put the clamshell in like this. Make sure that the thread rods are supported by press blocks, or if the clamshell is big enough, it can actually be protected. It can actually be supported by the bed itself, of the press itself. So clamshell's in here. This is the section of the shaft the bearing is going to get pressed on. You need to make the adjustment to these nuts so that shaft slides through the middle of it. It needs to fit nice and tight. So then these jaws are going to catch this inner race of the bearing, like so. All right, so now we're going to place the bearing. Make sure, like I said, this is the forward part of the shaft. Make sure that that snap ring right there goes on with orientation like that, because there's a snap ring that goes in that's going to retain this bearing in the housing. So put it like that. Set it in the clamshell. All right, we're going to make sure that everything is perfectly in line with the cylinder for the press. And you want to you don't want it to be sitting cockeyed like that, because you'll bend something or break something, or worse, this come flying out and it'll hit you, and injury, death, and or other. Use your imagination. So once again, make sure everything's straight up and down. So now we'll go ahead and start pressing. All right, I probably sped that last little bit up for you. Now we just made contact. Now we're going to start actually pressing onto the bearing. The bearing stopped moving, so we're home, and it's showing pressure on the gauge. So that means it bottomed out. If I keep on pushing, it will keep on building up pressure, and there's no need for that because the bearing is bottomed out. Now we're going to release the pressure. And there it is. Bearings pressed onto the input shaft, ready to go. All right, let's go grab the counter shaft. We'll press that bearing on. Now that we got the bearings pressed onto the shafts, now we have to put our lovely snap rings back on that retain that bearing. Now also I'm going to point out the interesting feature of these pair of snap ring pliers I have. You notice how they have little divots, indentations on either side? And the reason they are is those are designed to grab those sides of the snap ring. So you have a better chance of holding on to it. And then another thing you notice on how they design these open up completely parallel. That supposedly helps you a great deal. How much it helps, I don't really know. But once again, when it comes to snap rings, this is a love-hate relationship. You either love them or you hate them, and there's generally a lot of profanity involved in these. But spread the snap ring open, slide it down, and I'm not all the way in, but since I'm down below that lip right there, then I can just take the snap ring pliers, tap it until she snaps in. And there, snap ring's on. And you notice how I have this input shaft I clamped to the gear. And you always put something to protect the machine surface whenever you clamp anything like this in a vise. All right, this one's done. Let's do the next one. Our next step is we have to fit the counter shaft into the housing. Now, since this is an aftermarket gear ratio, this gear is substantially larger than the original one. So, once again, it doesn't turn real well right now. So we actually have to trim part of this aluminum housing away. As you see, this is a thin piece of metal. It's called a feeler gauge. I can go in there, but well, it wasn't going in there. But we got to do some trimming. So we have to trim out around there and across down here. So let's get the grinder out and let's get to work. Well, and there you have it. Gear spins nice and freely. There's no interference. And you can see up here, the snap ring groove is completely exposed. So we're right where we need to be. Everything is done. Now, a very, very important part of this is this housing and this gear have to be cleaned very, very well. Because all the metal filings that you saw flying around, they cannot be in there. If they are, you're going to have a very bad day. You're going to put all this back together and it's going to fail in short order. So anyways, clean everything up and then we'll get ready to keep on assembling. All right. The next step we have to do is this is our shift port. We'll shift from high range to low range. And since this Crawbox is going to be a reduction box only, like I said, there's only one of these. The complete case would have one on either side, and this shifter would go from one to the other. So we have to modify this. We have to take this little piece of metal. We're going to weld that in place so that will retain the end of the shifter in there so it can't go anywhere. So that's what we got to do now. So we'll go ahead and get set up. take the clamps off so I don't weld them on there by accident. Now we're going to flip it over. We're going to get the bottom side a little bit. There you have it. We're going to trim a little bit of that off, but now that retains the shifter the way it's supposed to. All right, on to the next step. Now we get to start doing some of the really fun stuff. So now we're really getting into assembly. So this is the rear adapter plate. This goes on the back. This is the case we've been working on over here, and eventually this will be bolted to that as such. But we got to put the guts of the case back together, and keep in mind, this housing right here and this bearing have both been cleaned very thoroughly after all that grinding we've done to it. So like I said, we don't want any of the metal in there. Now, I'm going to point out when I normally do this assemblies, like anytime you see a bearing, like I'm going to put grease inside this bearing as you need to. But I'm actually going to be putting, normally like on a ball bearing like this, I usually have a squirt bottle with some gear oil, and I'll just squirt some gear oil in there to pre-lubricate it while I'm assembling it. This, you put grease. These are called needle bearings inside of here, just because they look like little needles. And anyways, we're gonna put grease in here. But one note I'm gonna caution you: if you're building a gearbox like this and it's gonna sit for a while, is I'm actually gonna put grease inside all the bearings. I'm gonna put a coat of grease on top of all these gears, and the reason being is that it's gonna sit and get moist, and basically just with temperature change and condensation, you can get rust in here. And I don't want rust in here. Normally when a gearbox has been running in a vehicle, taken out and stored, it's okay because everything is covered in oil, or it has a thin coat of oil from being used, and it's okay. This, everything's clean, got no oil, so we got to put something to protect it. This right here is an example of exactly what I said. A friend of mine built a Crawbox, set it, more or less built it, sat in his shed for about three or 4 years, and basically I ended up swapping it into his truck for him. Did him a favor. I'm just a nice guy that way. Just leave it at that. So unfortunately, because this bearing was not packed full of grease, it rusted. So I ended up having to replace the bearing and a few other components before I could install them. So anyways, that's just a word of caution. And the only reason I'm greasing all this is because I got to work 2 jobs to pay for all this. So there's a possibility this might be sitting for a while. Even if I put it in the truck, it may be a year or more before the truck actually starts and moves under its own power to lubricate everything. So I'm going to cover all the guts. I'm going to cover everything with a nice healthy coat of grease. So, but enough yakking. Let's go. Let's get to work. This is our new main shaft or output shaft. Going to grease these needle bearings, and these are actually specifically called caged needle bearings. Count your lucky stars if you have that. Because there are some transmissions that these are just loose, royal pain in the butt. So that goes on there like so. This gear goes on like that. Then that collar goes on like there. That's our assembly. And this goes down in that bearing, like so. And then we're going to flip this over. And then down inside there, we have to put this mother of all snap rings. Pain in the butt. Hopefully you get footage of that. All right, here's a snap ring with pliers. All right, let's see if I can do this with or without curse words. All right, that snap ring is seated. Onward. Normally, there's a fair amount of profanity when I put those in. And here's our shift fork and our shift collar. And this slides down on it like so. All right, now that it's all shifting right, the detent, the plug's in. Now, this is the front adapter that adapts the front of this transfer case to the back of transmission. And you see these machine cutouts? These are to actually retain these bearings with these snap rings. Diabolical, isn't it? So, all right, once again, we're going back to the good old handy dandy RTV again. This is more or less assembled. That's coming off regardless. We got to do some other stuff. Now there's one last thing now we have one last thing to do before we move on to test fit the call box to both transfer case and transmission. Is this over here. I welded these on earlier. Then you put a puller on there, and let's see if it comes off. Let's speed this up a little bit. Voila, it's off. All right, now if you remember the video where we worked on the transmission, where we took this off, put the new seal housing in, the new coupler inside. Now we get to see if the crawl box actually fits. Well, that looks like that fits to me. What do you think? So unfortunately, I can't leave it here. Now let's go see if it fits the rear transfer case. Well, that fits almost like it was meant to, probably because it was.
I want to apologize about the video running as long as it has. Unfortunately, it was a lot of work and I had a lot of information I really wanted to get out to you. So, but anyways, we got it done. It's looking good. It's working great. I just can't tell you how excited I am to work on this project. So I can't wait for Inferno to get done. So, but got the crawl box built. We still got a little bit of work to do to the rear transfer case, having to do with some shifters. But if you want to know anything about that, you got to tune into the next video. So I appreciate you watching. If you like the video, please like it, share it with your friends, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you then.